As soon as I bought an apartment and a summer house, my husband filed for divorce and property division at that very moment, and my mother-in-law threw a party. But they didn't realize how badly they were messing up. I never thought I would one day be so grateful to my mother for her constant paranoia and distrust of people. "Molly, you're too open, too trusting," she had been telling me since childhood. "In this world, you always need a plan B." Mom always preferred to play it safe, even when it seemed excessive. How grateful I am now for that trait of hers. But let's start from the very beginning. My name is Molly. I'm 32 years old. I work as a translator at a large international company. My childhood was spent in a small town near Washington, D.C. Nothing remarkable, an ordinary school, piano lessons, which, to be honest, I never really liked but attended diligently for 7 years. After divorcing my father, my mother raised me and my younger brother on her own. She worked as an accountant at a local factory and sometimes took on extra jobs so that we wanted for nothing. Perhaps that's why I felt a strong need for financial independence from a young age. In school, I tutored younger students in English. At university, I translated texts for small companies. I always knew I was responsible for my own future. After graduating from a linguistics university, I immediately got a job at a translation company. The first years were intense. I took on any work, often staying late to finish urgent translations. But gradually, I built a client base and a reputation. By the age of 25, I was already a senior translator with a stable, fairly high income. That's when I decided it was time to fulfill my long-standing dream, to buy my own apartment. I saved for the down payment for almost 3 years, denying myself many things. Instead of trendy cafes, home-cooked dinners, instead of new clothes, sales, instead of vacations abroad, trips to a friend's parents' summer house. But every month, as I transferred a set amount to a separate account, I felt myself getting closer to my goal. When I finally had enough saved, I took out a mortgage and bought a small but very cozy one-bedroom apartment in a new building. 38 square meters of freedom and independence. I remember standing in the middle of the empty room with the keys in my hand, unable to believe that it was really mine. Mom said then, "Remember, Molly, owning your own home is the most important thing for a woman. It's your fortress, your stronghold." I eagerly started the renovation, choosing every detail myself, from wall colors to kitchen cabinet handles. I did a lot of it myself to save money, painting, wallpapering, assembling furniture in the evenings after work. Every inch of that apartment was created with love. It took me nearly 5 years to fully pay off the mortgage. I took on extra projects, worked on weekends, and even started an evening job teaching language courses. But it was worth it. The day I made the last payment, I opened a bottle of champagne and felt an incredible pride in myself. And then he appeared, Victor. We met at a corporate event for a client company for whom I was translating an important international contract. Victor was the head of the sales department, tall, confident, with an attentive gaze and a charming smile. He approached me with a glass of wine and said, "Finally, I can personally thank the person who made sure we didn't fail the German contract." His voice was deep and soft, and his eyes showed genuine admiration. We talked all evening. Victor turned out to be an engaging conversationalist. He traveled a lot, was knowledgeable about art and literature, and was both erudite and witty. By the end of the evening, I realized I hadn't met a man like him in a long time. He walked me home and asked for my phone number. The next day he called and invited me to a contemporary art exhibition. That's how our romance began. The first few months felt like a fairy tale: flowers for no reason, unexpected gifts, romantic dinners, long conversations until dawn. Victor literally carried me on his hands. He knew how to compliment, how to listen, and seemed to always anticipate my desires. In hindsight, there were already red flags that I stubbornly ignored. For example, Victor was often late. At first by 15 minutes, then half an hour, sometimes even an hour. There were always reasonable explanations: traffic, work delays, urgent calls. I waited for him in cafes, at the subway, at the cinema, and convinced myself it was no big deal. He could also cancel plans at the last minute. Sorry, darling. Work emergency. And I always understood and accepted it. Victor could apologize so sincerely and make such touching compensatory gifts that it was impossible to stay mad at him. Sometimes, when talking about his work and achievements, he would embellish the truth. I noticed some inconsistencies in his stories but dismissed them as quirks of male perception. All men exaggerate their successes a little, I thought. But the biggest warning sign I ignored was his attitude toward money. Victor loved to live luxuriously: expensive restaurants, designer clothes, prestigious events. At the same time, he often complained about temporary financial difficulties. "I've got a small cash flow problem right now. Can you help me out?" And I would lend him money without asking questions. He always paid me back, but irregularly and in parts. I was in love, and all these little things seemed insignificant compared to how happy I felt with him. After a year of dating, Victor proposed. It was very romantic: dinner on the roof of a skyscraper with a view of the city at night, champagne, a diamond ring, and him on one knee. Of course, I said yes. Then I met his mother. Rebecca lived in a spacious 3-room apartment in the center of Washington. The apartment was filled with antique furniture. Paintings in heavy frames hung on the walls. Porcelain figurines were everywhere. Rebecca herself, a woman with perfect hair and impeccable nails, greeted me with a strained smile. "Well, finally Victor has brought his fiancée." She sized me up with an appraising look. "I hope you know how to cook." My son is used to home-cooked meals. That question was just the beginning. During lunch, she methodically interrogated me about every detail of my life: where I studied, what I do for a living, how much I earn, who my parents are. Every answer I gave was met with a barely perceptible tightening of her lips. "A translator?" She glanced at her son. "I thought you'd find a doctor or a lawyer." "But of course, a translator is fine too." Victor smiled and just shrugged, never commenting on his mother's jabs. After lunch, when we were alone in the kitchen, she suddenly softened her tone, adopting a confiding manner. "You know, Molly, Victor is a special boy. He needs special care. He's very talented but a bit helpless in everyday life. I hope you understand what a treasure you've got." I nodded, feeling awkward, but convinced myself that, over time, we would find common ground. How wrong I was. Planning the wedding turned into a battle. I wanted a modest ceremony with close friends and family, but Rebecca insisted on a grand event. "Victor deserves a proper wedding, not one of your trendy little gatherings," she declared and took the planning into her own hands. I was too busy with work and let her handle most of the preparations, a decision I bitterly regretted later. The wedding became a showcase of Rebecca's taste and connections. 70% of the guest list consisted of people I had never met in my life: Rebecca's colleagues, her friends, relatives I didn't even know existed. My dress, which I had chosen myself, was replaced at the last moment with another, picked by my mother-in-law, more suitable for a real wedding. The menu, the flowers, the music, everything was done against my wishes. The only comfort was the thought that after the wedding, Victor and I would live in my apartment, away from his mother. But even here, I faced a surprise. A week before the wedding, Victor suddenly said, "I was thinking your apartment is too small for us. Maybe we could live at my mom's for a while. She has 3 rooms, there'll be enough space. Later, when we save for something bigger, we'll move." I was stunned. We had never discussed this option before. I wanted to scream, "No, I don't want to live with your mother." But instead, I asked calmly, "What about my apartment? I could rent it out, and that money could go toward our future home. Victor lit up. Great idea. See how smart you are. Anyway, it'll be more convenient at my mom's, closer to the center. And she can help with the household chores. So I ended up in that very antique-filled apartment, where every step was accompanied by Rebecca's comments. Molly, you didn't make the bed correctly again. Let me show you how it's done. Molly, don't you know Victor doesn't like onions in his salad? Molly, why are you coming home from work so late? Victor's been hungry for 2 hours. At first, Victor still tried to smooth over conflicts, but gradually, he increasingly sided with his mother. Mom is right. Mom knows best. Don't argue with Mom. These phrases became a norm for me. My own active and successful life increasingly irritated Rebecca. She especially hated it when I stayed late at work or went on business trips. What kind of wife behaves like this? She would exclaim. In a family, the husband is the provider, and the wife should create comfort, but you're always running off to your translations. Meanwhile, my career was soaring. I was promoted to head of the translation team, my salary increased, and I gained the ability to choose projects. I started receiving offers from other companies, including international ones. Victor, on the other hand, was going through rough times. His company had a change in management, and the new director did not appreciate his working methods. Instead of the promotion he had been expecting, he was demoted to a regular sales manager position. This hit his ego hard. They just don't see my potential, he complained to me in the evenings. I could be running the whole department, but they keep me stuck in this boring job. At the same time, he began skipping work more frequently, citing poor health or family circumstances. I suspected that things at work were far from as smooth as he claimed. Our financial situation was becoming increasingly tense as well. Victor thought it was normal to spend money on expensive restaurants and new gadgets, even when his salary had fallen significantly below mine. He frequently asked me to lend him until payday, and the amounts kept growing. Molly, you understand, it's just a temporary difficulty, he would say. Everything will be fine soon, and I'll pay you back with interest. I hardly saw any of my own money, but I still tried to believe that it really was a temporary problem. Besides, the income from my rented apartment provided a steady cash flow that kept us afloat. Meanwhile, Rebecca led an active social life. Every week, she hosted tea parties for her friends, where she loved to showcase me like an exotic exhibit. And here's our workaholic. Can you imagine? She came home from work at 11 p.m. yesterday. I wonder what kind of mother she'll be. Kids need attention, not just money. The topic of children became another point of contention. After a year of living together, Rebecca began regularly asking when she would finally get grandchildren. Every month, she eagerly awaited good news and was disappointed each time. At your age, Molly, it's already time to think about having children, she would say. Otherwise, it might be too late later. I wanted children too, but not in such an environment. I felt we should first resolve our housing and financial issues, build a truly strong family, and only then think about having a child. Victor seemed to have no opinion of his own on the matter. When we were alone, he agreed with me that it wasn't the right time. But in the presence of his mother, he suddenly started dreaming about a son or daughter. Yes, Mom, we're planning. Molly will soon leave that job of hers, and then we'll start having children. Leave my job? We had never discussed such a thing. But arguing in front of Rebecca was pointless. I could only clench my fists under the table in silence. About 1.5 years into this life, the first serious conflict occurred. I was offered to participate in a major international project that required frequent trips to Europe. It was an excellent opportunity for career growth and a significant increase in income. When I told Victor about it, he unexpectedly exploded. Are you out of your mind? What trips? You're a married woman. Who will cook dinners while you're away? Who will take care of the family? I was stunned by his reaction. Before the wedding, he had always supported my career ambitions, been proud of my achievements, and now suddenly he had turned into a dissatisfied man. Victor, this is a great opportunity for both of us, I tried to explain. I'll earn much more. We can save for our own apartment faster. No, he cut me off. I won't agree to this project. You'll have to decline. His words felt like a slap. He won't agree? Since when does he decide what I can or cannot do? That evening, we had a huge argument. For the first time in our marriage, I shouted at him, pouring out everything that had built up over the months about his mother, finances, and his attitude toward me. I don't understand what's happened to you, I said. You've become a completely different person. Or were you always like this, and I just didn't notice? Victor looked at me with a cold rage I had never seen in his eyes before. You've become far too full of yourself, Molly, he hissed. Do you think your translators are that important? They'll find someone else to translate without you. But family, that's really important. The next day, when I returned from work, he greeted me with a bouquet of flowers and a guilty smile. Forgive me, I overreacted. Of course, you should take that project. I'll support you. His apology seemed sincere, and I believed once again that everything could be set right. But when I actually accepted the offer and went on my first business trip, the real test began. Rebecca, at every opportunity, reminded me of how I had abandoned my family for my career. Victor grew colder and more distant with each passing day. And when I returned from trips, he conducted intense interrogations, who I had been in contact with, why I was delayed, why I had called so late. One evening, when I came back from a week-long business trip to Berlin, Victor greeted me unusually enthusiastically. I have a great idea, he said, helping me unpack my suitcase. Let's sell your apartment and buy something bigger. A 3-room one, for example. And it would also be good to have a country house. You like nature, right? Remember how wonderful it was at your friend's dacha? I froze, holding my dress. Sell the apartment? But I had thought we would save for a down payment first, and only then consider selling. Why wait? Victor sat down next to me. You earn well now. I'll be getting a raise soon too. We can handle the mortgage. And your apartment will be a good start for the down payment. I didn't know what to say. On one hand, the idea of moving from my mother-in-law's apartment to our own place seemed very appealing. On the other hand, my apartment was more than just property to me. It was a symbol of the independence I had fought so hard to achieve. Think about the space for future children, Victor continued, seeing my hesitation. A big apartment, fresh air at the dacha on weekends. Isn't that what you want? Children. He knew exactly which buttons to push. Of course, I dreamed of children, of a real family. And if that meant sacrificing the apartment, maybe it wasn't such a high price. I'll think about it, I finally answered. It's a serious decision. You can't make it spontaneously. Of course, think about it, Victor smiled. But don't drag it out. Now is a good time to buy real estate. For the next few weeks, he regularly returned to the topic, showing me apartment listings, talking about the advantages of different neighborhoods, calculating what budget we could have considering the sale of my apartment and a possible mortgage. Rebecca unexpectedly supported the idea too. Victor is right, you need your own place. You live like students. It's time to get a proper family apartment. Her sudden support for our move seemed strange to me. In the past 2 years, she had never expressed a desire for us to move out. On the contrary, she always insisted that it was more convenient for us to live together. But I was so excited at the prospect of escaping her constant control that I didn't analyze this change. The pressure increased every day. Victor became irritable if I expressed doubts. What? You don't want the best future for us? Do you really like living with my mom? And what about the children? Have you thought about them? I heard such phrases almost every day. One evening, when we were discussing it again, I couldn't take it anymore. Fine. Let's sell the apartment and buy something bigger. But only on the condition that we make all the decisions ourselves, without your mom's involvement. Victor beamed. Of course, honey. It's our apartment, our decision. Mom has nothing to do with this. I could see he was lying. After 2 years of living together, I had learned to notice these little signs: a barely noticeable eyelid twitch, an overly wide smile, avoidance of eye contact. But I was so tired of constant arguments that I decided to turn a blind eye. The next day I called my mother. I needed advice from someone I truly trusted. Mom, Victor and I decided to sell my apartment and buy a bigger one. What do you think? There was silence on the line. Then my mother cautiously asked, "Whose idea was this?" "Victor's," I answered honestly. "He says we need more space for future children. And he also wants to buy a dacha." I see, there was worry in my mother's voice. "And who will own the new apartment?" "Well, probably both of us." I hadn't thought about it before. After all, we're married. So it will be joint ownership. Molly, my mother's voice became serious. "I've been wanting to tell you something for a long time, but I didn't dare. I don't like your Victor. And I don't like his mother either. I can see how you've changed over these 2 years. You've become nervous, constantly worried. This doesn't look like a happy marriage." Her words struck me deeply. I knew our marriage was far from perfect, but hearing it from my mother hurt. "Victor isn't perfect, but he's trying," I tried to defend my husband. "Everyone goes through difficult periods." Maybe, my mother didn't argue. "But if you've decided to sell your apartment, I suggest you do one thing. Register the new property in my name." "What?" I couldn't believe my ears. "Why?" "Call it motherly intuition," my mother replied calmly. "If everything is fine, as you say, then what difference does it make whose name the property is under? And if it isn't, this will be your insurance." I wanted to argue, to say it was nonsense, that I shouldn't treat my husband this way. But something inside me stirred. Perhaps it was that inner voice I had been ignoring for so long. "I'll think about your suggestion," I finally said. "But don't tell anyone about this," I warned my mother. "Especially Victor. If everything is really fine, he doesn't need to know such details. And if it isn't, better that he doesn't suspect anything until the last moment." After that conversation, I couldn't get my mother's words out of my head. I began to observe Victor more closely, noticing details I hadn't paid attention to before. For example, the fact that he increasingly forgot his wallet and asked me to pay at restaurants. Or the strange phone conversations he had in hushed tones, walking into another room. And his frequent visits to his mother, after which he would return with new ideas about which apartment we should buy. One evening, when Victor thought I was already asleep, I accidentally overheard a phone conversation. "Yes, Mom. Everything is going according to plan," he said quietly. "Molly agreed to sell the apartment. I've already arranged things with Derek. He'll find us a buyer. No, she suspects nothing. Of course, after the sale, we'll immediately start looking for a new place. I've already picked some options. Yes, my share will be 50%, as the law requires." I lay there, afraid to move, feeling a coldness spread inside me. According to plan, my share, what was he talking about? I tried to convince myself that I had misunderstood, that it was just an ordinary conversation about buying property. But deep down, I knew it was something else. The next day I called my mother. "You were right," I said, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "I agree to your plan. But tell me more about how this will work legally." Mom, as if she had been expecting this call, immediately began explaining. It turned out she had already consulted a lawyer and knew all the details. You sell your apartment, the money goes into your account. Then you transfer it to me, as a loan or for safekeeping. I buy the new apartment and the dacha, registering them in my name. In practice, you'll live in these properties, use them, but legally they'll belong to me. At any moment, if you want, I can transfer them to you. Is this legal? I doubted. Absolutely, my mother answered confidently. Relatives can give each other money, lend it, make any transactions. There's nothing illegal here. I still hesitated. The plan seemed like an excessive precaution. After all, Victor is my husband. Yes, we have problems, but not so serious that such measures are necessary. I'm not insisting, my mother said gently, sensing my hesitation. I'm just suggesting a way to protect yourself. If everything is fine, as you say, in a year or two you can always transfer the property to you and Victor. But if it isn't, this will give you protection. That evening I couldn't sleep for a long time, turning over my mother's words and the conversation I had overheard from Victor. Something didn't add up, something worried me. But on the other hand, the thought of having my own 3-room apartment and a dacha was so tempting. We would finally move out from Rebecca and start building a real family of our own. Finally, I made a decision. I would follow my mother's plan, but only as a temporary measure. If within a year our relationship with Victor improved, I would transfer the property to both of us. That would be fair. The next day I told Victor that I agreed to sell the apartment and look for a new place. Excellent, he literally beamed with joy. I'm ready to get started. I have a realtor friend, Derek. He'll help us with the sale and find good options for the purchase. I'd like to choose the realtor myself, I said cautiously. I have a friend too. She works at a good agency. Victor frowned. You don't trust me? Derek is a professional. I've known him for a long time. It's not about trust, I tried to speak calmly. It's just my apartment, and I want to oversee the sale process. Your apartment? Something unfriendly flashed in his eyes. We're a family, Molly. What's yours is mine too. Isn't that right? I felt a tension rise inside me. That tone, that look, could my mother really be right? And do I really not know the person I married at all? Of course, we're a family, I tried to ease the situation. It's just that I feel more comfortable this way. I know these matters better. Fine, he reluctantly agreed. Let your realtor handle it. But I want to participate in all meetings and negotiations. And so began the process of selling my apartment. I reached out to Kate, a former classmate who had been working in a real estate agency for several years. She quickly found buyers willing to pay a good price. At the same time, we started looking for suitable options to buy. Victor, as promised, was actively involved in the entire process. He went to viewings, discussed deal details, and studied documents. But I noticed something strange. He was most interested in the legal aspects. Who would be the owner? What documents would be required? How would the ownership be registered? For someone who previously had no interest in such matters, this seemed suspicious. One evening, as we were returning from viewing another apartment, he casually asked, "And whose name will the new apartment be under?" Probably both of ours in equal shares. I felt my heart start to race. This was exactly the question I had feared. I think initially in my name, I replied, trying to sound casual. After all, the money comes from the sale of my apartment, so it makes sense that I would be the owner. Later, Once we've earned money for renovations and furnishing, we can transfer it to both of us. Victor slammed on the brakes and turned to me. What do you mean initially in your name? We're married, Molly. Everything acquired during the marriage is joint property. Your apartment was before the marriage, so it's yours alone. The new one will be bought while we're married, so it should be joint property. That's the law. His reaction was so sharp that I was frightened. Had I really touched a nerve so obviously? I just hadn't thought about it. I tried to smooth things over. Of course, we'll discuss everything. The main thing now is to find a good option. Victor stared at me for a few more seconds, then nodded and started the car again. But I could see he was still dissatisfied. That evening I accidentally overheard his conversation with his mother. She suspects something. Mom, she said she wants to register the apartment only in her name. This could ruin everything. Calm down, Victor. Rebecca's voice sounded confident. She can't do that. By law, if you buy property during marriage, it automatically becomes joint property. Even if she registers it only in her name, in the event of a divorce, you'll still get half. I froze behind the door, feeling my blood turn cold. In the event of a divorce, so they were already planning a divorce and dividing my apartment. At that moment, all doubts vanished. I realized that my mother had been right. Victor and his mother had been planning this scheme from the start, make me sell my apartment, buy a new one, and then divorce and divide the property. In the end, Victor would get half the value of my apartment without contributing anything himself. The next day I met with my mother and told her about the conversation I had overheard. I knew it, she sighed. But it's good that you realized it yourself. Now we need to act very carefully. They mustn't suspect our plan. We devised a detailed strategy. I would continue searching for the apartment and the dacha, pretending to be unaware. But the money from the sale of my apartment would go to my mother, and she would buy the new property, registering it in her name. What will I tell Victor? I asked. He'll want to participate in the deal, sign the documents. Say that I'm partially helping with the money, so according to the bank's rules, the property will be in my name until the loan is fully repaid, my mother suggested. It's a common practice. He shouldn't suspect anything. That's what we did. My apartment was successfully sold, and the money was transferred to my account. That same day I transferred it to my mother, with a notarized loan agreement. Meanwhile, Victor and I found an excellent 3-room apartment in a new building and a small dacha 50 kilometers from the city. Victor was thrilled with both options. Imagine how we'll live, he said dreamily. There will be enough space for everyone in the apartment, and at the dacha we'll grow organic vegetables. When it came time to finalize the deals, as planned, I told Victor that my mother was helping us financially, so the apartment and dacha would be registered in her name. Only temporarily, I hurried to add, seeing the expression on his face change. As soon as we repay her, we'll transfer everything into our names. But that's not right, Victor objected. Why can't she just lend us the money? Why all these complications with the paperwork? It's a bank requirement, I repeated the prepared explanation. Mom is taking out a loan secured by her property to help us. But the bank requires that the property we're buying is also registered in her name as additional collateral. Victor clearly didn't believe me, but he had no choice. If he started insisting, it would only confirm my suspicions. So he reluctantly agreed to my plan. Fine, let it be your way. But as soon as we get the chance, we'll transfer everything to our names, he said firmly. Of course, darling, I smiled the most genuine smile I could muster. The next few weeks were full of errands. We processed the documents, transferred money, met with sellers and lawyers. Mom really did take a small loan to make my story plausible. But the bulk of the funds came from selling my apartment. Finally, the day came when all the transactions were completed. We became the owners, or rather, my mom became the owner of a spacious 3-room apartment in a new building and a cozy country house with a 10-acre plot. That evening, Victor and I opened a bottle of champagne to celebrate. To a new life. He toasted, clinking glasses with me. To a new life, I echoed, unaware of how prophetic those words would turn out to be. We drank our glasses, and suddenly Victor set his aside and looked at me seriously. Molly, we need to talk. There was something in his tone that made me tense up. About what? About us. About our marriage. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. I've thought about it a lot and decided that it's better for us to separate. I stared at him, unable to believe my ears. Although subconsciously I had expected something like this, I didn't think it would happen so quickly, so unceremoniously. The moment I bought the apartment and the country house, my husband immediately filed for divorce and property division, and his mother threw a party. But they didn't realize just how badly they were messing things up. Separate? I repeated slowly. Why? We're too different, Victor spoke in rehearsed phrases, as if he had practiced this speech. We have different values, different views on life. You're too focused on your career, and I want a real family. I think it will be better for both of us if we part ways now, before we make mistakes that can't be undone. I see, my voice sounded surprisingly calm, though inside I was boiling with anger and hurt. And when did you come to this conclusion? By any chance, was it when we bought the new apartment and the country house? Victor looked momentarily flustered but quickly regained his composure. This has nothing to do with the property. I've been thinking about this for a long time. And now that we've resolved the housing issue, we can calmly handle the divorce. Calmly handle the divorce, I echoed. And what, you've already filed? Yes, he didn't even try to feign embarrassment. This morning. And I also filed for property division. Division of what property? I tried to make my voice sound confused, though I fully understood what he meant. The apartment and the country house, of course, there was now a metallic edge in his voice. They were bought during the marriage, so they are marital property. By law, I'm entitled to half. I stayed silent, staring at the person I once loved and trusted. Now in front of me sat a complete stranger with a cold, calculating gaze. But they are registered in my mom's name, I finally said. That doesn't matter, Victor waved it off. What matters is the source of the funds, and the money came from the sale of your apartment, which you sold while married to me. So it's our joint money, and the property bought with it is also joint. The court will determine my share. He spoke confidently, like someone well prepared for this conversation. He had probably consulted lawyers and studied the law. I saw the gleam of anticipation in his eyes. He was already mentally dividing the money he would get from selling his share of the apartment and the country house. And where will you live after the divorce? I asked. At first, at my mom's place, he shrugged. Later, when I get my share from selling the property, I'll buy my own place or live off the interest. We'll see. I see, I got up from the table. You know, I'm too tired for such serious conversations today. Let's revisit this tomorrow. There's no need to postpone. Victor also stood up. I've already packed my things and I'm moving to my mom's today. Tomorrow, you'll get the official notice from my lawyer. That fast? I couldn't hide my surprise. You don't even want to try to fix things? Fix what? He smirked. You don't love me anymore. Me neither. Why drag it out? I watched as he gathered his things, just a few suitcases, which, as it turned out, had already been packed for a long time. Everything was planned, everything calculated down to the last detail. By the way, he tossed them at the door. Mom's throwing a small party tonight. Celebrating my return to single life. Want to join? He laughed, clearly pleased with his cruel joke. When the door closed behind him, I collapsed onto the couch. Even though I had suspected his plans, reality was far more painful than I expected. 2 years of marriage, 2 years I had devoted to a man who saw in me only a source of benefit. I called my mom and told her what had happened. "Come over to my place," she immediately suggested. "Don't stay alone." "No, Mom, I'm okay," I reassured her. "Better tell me, what happens now? Can he really claim a share of the apartment in the country house?" "Of course not," Mom replied confidently. "Can he prove that the property was bought with the money from selling your apartment?" "According to the documents, I bought it with my own funds. We have a notarized loan agreement showing that you lent me money for personal needs. How I spent it is my business. But what if he proves that the money from selling my apartment was transferred to you specifically to buy the new property?" "He won't," Mom answered calmly. "I received a loan from you, which by law becomes my property from the moment I received it. After that, I managed it as I saw fit. The fact that I decided to buy real estate was my personal decision. Victor has nothing to do with it." Her confidence calmed me somewhat, but anxiety lingered. What if there are legal loopholes we don't know about? What if Victor finds a good lawyer who can bypass our arrangement? The next day, as Victor promised, his lawyer, Ben's Grace, called me and informed me that he was representing my husband in the divorce proceedings. He strongly recommended not complicating the situation and agreeing to an amicable resolution regarding property division. "Your husband is willing to accept 30% of the property value," he said in a businesslike tone. "It's a very generous offer, considering that by law he's entitled to half." "What property?" I decided to maintain an air of complete ignorance. "We have no joint property." "Don't play games, Molly," the lawyer's voice took on a steely edge. "We know you sold your apartment for $200,000 and used that money to buy a 3-room apartment and a country house, registering them under your mother's name. This is an attempt to conceal marital property, which is illegal." "You're mistaken," I tried to speak confidently. "I did sell my apartment and lent the money to my mom for her personal use. She bought the property with her own funds. These are entirely separate transactions. The court will see that." Now the lawyer didn't even try to hide the threat in his voice. "We have evidence that you acted to hide assets from division. This could have serious consequences for you. Thanks for the warning. I decided to end this unpleasant conversation. But I prefer to communicate through my own lawyer. Goodbye." After that conversation, I realized I truly needed professional legal help. I contacted a lawyer recommended by a friend. Anthony Smith, an experienced family law attorney, listened carefully to my story. "The situation is complicated, but not hopeless," he said after reviewing all the documents. "Your ex-husband will try to prove that the transfer of money to your mother and the subsequent property purchase were sham transactions intended to conceal assets. But he has no direct evidence of this. And we have all the necessary documents, properly executed according to the law. So, we can win?" I asked hopefully. "I would say we have good chances," Anthony Smith replied cautiously. "But we need to be prepared for the process to be long and unpleasant. Your husband is clearly serious about this." And indeed, the process turned out to be exactly that, long and unpleasant. Victor and his lawyer used every possible means to prove that I had deliberately hidden assets from the division. They presented printouts of my phone conversations with my mother. It turned out that Victor had requested a detailed record of my calls from the operator. Witness testimony: Rebecca swore that she had heard me discussing with my mother a plan to hide property. Even some of my alleged notes with an action plan, obviously forged. But we had irrefutable legal documents, a loan agreement between my mother and me, a receipt for the money received, bank statements confirming the movement of funds, and purchase agreements in which my mother was listed as the sole buyer. During one of the hearings, a particularly telling episode occurred. Victor's lawyer insisted that my mother could not have bought real estate with her own funds because she did not have sufficient income. Cheryl, could you please tell us what your income is? He asked my mother, who had been called as a witness. I have a pension, my mother replied calmly, and savings that I accumulated throughout my life, as well as income from renting out commercial property. Commercial property? The lawyer clearly hadn't expected that answer. I own 2 small shops that I rent out, my mother explained. They were inherited from my parents. It was the absolute truth, unknown to both Victor and his mother. My grandparents had indeed owned small shops, which passed to my mother after their deaths. She had never flaunted this property and lived modestly, but the rental income gave her a certain financial independence. Victor's lawyer's face fell, and Victor himself turned pale. Clearly, they had expected a completely different scenario. My mother provided the court with all the necessary documents confirming ownership of the commercial premises and the rental agreements. Gradually, Victor's position became weaker. With each hearing, his arguments crumbled against irrefutable legal facts. And finally, the day came for the court to deliver its decision. The courtroom was unusually crowded. I noticed that, in addition to the usual participants, Rebecca's support group was present, several of her friends whispering to each other with smug expressions. Rebecca herself sat next to her son, occasionally glancing in my direction with barely concealed triumph. When the judge began reading the decision, I felt my heart pounding in my chest. Despite all the reassurances from my lawyer, I had feared until the last moment that Victor might somehow win. In Victor's claim against Molly Cooper regarding the division of jointly acquired property, the claim is entirely denied. I didn't immediately grasp the meaning of these words. Denied entirely? Could it be that we had won? The remainder of the decision contained a detailed analysis of all the evidence presented and a legal justification for why the apartment and the summer house acquired by my mother could not be considered jointly acquired marital property. The court recognized that the money received from the sale of my premarital apartment had been given to my mother as a loan, as confirmed by notarized documents. And the subsequent acquisition of real estate by my mother was her personal decision as an independent individual. When the judge finished reading the decision, a silence fell over the courtroom. I looked at Victor. He was sitting, literally frozen in place, eyes wide open. His lawyer frantically flipped through papers, as if still hoping to find a saving argument. Rebecca, pale and drawn, clutched her son's hand tightly. "This is impossible," she whispered loud enough for me to hear. "They couldn't do this. They were supposed to divide it." I rose from my seat and, accompanied by my lawyer, headed toward the exit. Passing Victor, our eyes met. His gaze held a whole range of emotions: anger, disbelief, confusion, and something resembling respect. For the first time during all our encounters, he looked at me not as a means to achieve his goals, but as a worthy opponent. "How could you?" was all he asked. "Just like you," I replied calmly. "Only I defended what was mine, while you tried to take what wasn't. I left the courthouse a different person." It was as if a massive burden I had carried on my shoulders all this time had finally lifted. I had won not only the legal battle but also a life battle against someone who tried to use me. After the trial, the divorce process proceeded quickly and without complications. We really didn't have any jointly acquired property that needed to be divided. Victor didn't contest the court's decision, apparently realizing the futility of further struggle. A few weeks after the divorce, I happened to run into Rebecca at the supermarket. She had noticeably aged and seemed somehow diminished, having lost her usual haughtiness. When she saw me, she abruptly turned to leave, but then stopped and approached. "Are you satisfied?" she asked bitterly. "You destroyed a family, left Victor with nothing." "I didn't destroy the family, Rebecca," I replied calmly. "Your son made the decision himself as soon as he decided he had gotten everything he wanted from me. And about nothing, don't dramatize." Victor has a job, an education, and most importantly, he has you, ready to support him in any adventure. We thought you were a simple girl we could manipulate, she suddenly admitted, staring past me. But you turned out to be cleverer than all of us? Not cleverer, I shook my head. I just defended what I honestly earned. And I had a mother who supported me just like you supported your son. Only with one difference, she taught me to defend myself, not to attack others. Rebecca said nothing, merely pressed her lips together and walked on, pushing her grocery cart. I watched her go, feeling a strange emotion, not gloating, not triumph, but a kind of quiet satisfaction. I had won, yet the victory did not bring me pure joy. Too much energy, time, and emotion had been spent on someone unworthy of even a minute of my life. Nearly 2 years have passed since that memorable day in court. I continue living in the same 3-room apartment that my mother and I bought. Only now it's in my name. My mother transferred it to me immediately after all the court proceedings concluded. My career continues to grow. I was promoted to head of the International Projects Department. My income has increased significantly. I travel for work more often, without worrying about anyone at home being displeased. I also kept the country house. Every weekend, from early spring to late autumn, I go there. I grow flowers and vegetables, meet friends, and host barbecues. My mother often joins me, and we work together in the garden or simply sit on the veranda, drinking tea and talking. I know almost nothing about Victor. Occasionally, mutual acquaintances bring rumors that he's trying to build a relationship with some new woman, but so far unsuccessfully. They say he changed a lot after our divorce. He became withdrawn, irritable. Maybe this experience taught him something. Or maybe he's just looking for a new victim for his manipulations. In any case, it's no longer my problem. I do not regret what happened. Of course, 2 years spent in a relationship with someone who saw me only as a source of benefit is a significant loss. But I learned a lot during that time. I became stronger, wiser, learned to recognize falsehood, and to distinguish genuine feelings from games. It was a costly, but valuable experience. Recently, I met an interesting man. He works as an architect. We met at an international exhibition where I was working as a translator. We started talking, sometimes meet, go to the cinema or exhibitions. He is very different from Victor. Calm, reliable, without loud phrases or grand gestures. I don't know where our relationship will lead, but one thing is certain, I will be much more cautious now. Not in terms of distrusting people, but in being more attentive to who I allow into my life. And most importantly, I realized how important it is to have people around who truly love you and care about your well-being. For me, that person is my mother. Her wisdom, foresight, and unconditional support saved me from serious losses and disappointments. She taught me the most important life principle: trust people, but always have a plan B, because in this life, we are responsible for our own happiness and well-being. Sometimes in the evenings, I sit on the balcony of my apartment, look at the city spreading below, and think about how strangely life unfolds. How people who should be the closest can betray you, while those we take for granted turn out to be our saviors. My story could have ended very differently. I could have lost everything I had worked hard for, been left without a home, with a broken heart, and a shaken faith in people. But thanks to my mother's wisdom and my own determination, I not only kept my property but also gained a new, free life. If you ever find yourself in a situation where your intuition tells you something is wrong, listen to it. Don't be afraid to take precautions, even if others think you're paranoid. After all, it's better to be safe and wrong than to lose everything due to misplaced trust. And remember, true love will never demand sacrifices you are not ready to make. It will not manipulate you, make you feel guilty, or set conditions. True love accepts you as you are and wishes you only the best. I am grateful to fate for this lesson, bitter as it was. It made me who I am today, a strong, independent woman who knows her worth and will not let anyone take what rightfully belongs to her. As for Victor and his mother, I forgave them long ago, not for their sake, but for mine, because anger and resentment are heavy burdens that are not worth carrying further. They played their role in my life and left the stage. I continue writing my story. And now it's truly my story, without other people's scripts and directions. Sometimes the best answer is a happy life after all the trials. And I intend to make my life exactly that, happy, fulfilling, free from toxic people and manipulation. This is my final move in someone else's game, to leave it victorious and start my own game on my own terms.